Okay, and welcome to video number 7 of the analysis of the classical Japanese in Okami. I'm going to change up the formula this time around. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the summary of what the Celestial Brush God is actually saying early so we can get to the good stuff first. So for those of you who are just really wanting to know what exactly is being said, I can just do that for you. And again, we can just get right into the good stuff and then the analysis will come after. And today we are going over what the brush god, the brushstroke god, Nuregami says when you get the brushstroke technique, which is the one where you can do all sorts of stuff in the water. You draw a line from the water, it makes it sprout, and you have like a fountain of waters and whatever. And I believe you can draw a line from water to all sorts of things like a container or whatever, and it takes it and it puts the water in the container or what have you. But anyway, for those of you who are first-time viewers, the first thing you might be asking is, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Well, specifically what I'm doing is I am going through video games and I am finding instances of classical Japanese and explaining how it works and how the grammar works and whatnot. Now, what is classical Japanese? Classical Japanese is the coolest form of Japanese in that it is the Japanese that was spoken by the Heian aristocracy around 1,000 years ago, and those are the people who basically laid the foundations for modern Japanese traditional culture as we understand it. They were the ones who came up with some of the most important literary works of Japanese history, including the Tale of Genji, the Makara no Soshi. They made some of the most important poetry, which defined Japanese literature history, literary history for centuries. And so in video games and anime, a lot of the times, when you have a character who is like godlike, who is just powerful and regal and aristocratic, a lot of times what you will do is in order to give them a certain like mysterious and powerful and godlike edge in their characterization, what you'll do is you'll have them speak or say some kind of classical Japanese. And so I thought that was cool, and because of that, and me particularly enjoying Japanese culture in general in games and anime, I'm going through and I'm finding instances of those of classical Japanese and translating it for you. So if any of you guys are interested in learning this stuff too, you don't have to go through all of the headaches that I went to get to this point where I actually understand it a little bit. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, let's go through and summarize what is being said, and then we will get to a linguistic breakdown, okay? So this is brushstroke technique number 7, I believe, number 7, Nuregami. And we'll let this little intro play out, because it's always fun. And I believe they do characterize Nuregami as a female. You'll see the little voice noises that she makes. It sounds very feminine. Okay, so Nuregami is the god's name. O warera ga jibo ameterasu o mikami. O our divine, our compassionate mother ameterasu o mikami. Our divine, compassionate, great goddess, heaven shining, is what you could say. Omoto ga Omoto ga o kakure tamaishi sai wa. So, when you honorifically hid yourself, when you honorifically disappeared from the world, i.e. when you honorifically died, minamo ni aruji o shinobi, I, on the surface of the water, in the surface of the water, thought fondly, recalled fondly, and recalled with much emotion, I guess you could say, my lord, my aruji, sodoyo uruo shitarumo, wetting my sleeves, dampening my sleeves, which we'll get into what the significance of that is. Oh, too far. Hi no keshiki yomigaeri taru to araba. If the appearance of the sun were to one day become good again, were to resurrect itself again, if I were to see the sun one more time, it's a very fancy way of saying if I were to see the sun one more time, i.e. if I were to encounter you, goddess of the sun, once more, kono Nuregami, I Nuregami, Iza, chi ni moyuru midori ni inochi no uruoi o ataem. Well then, come now, or let's go, to the green that sprouts all over the world, that grows all over the earth. I will give it the wetness of life. I will bestow upon it the waters of life. Let's go with that. I will bestow upon it the waters of life. Okay. So let's go ahead and break all of this down because, again, there was a lot of interesting stuff there that does require some explanation. Okay, so if you've seen these previous videos, you will be familiar with this part. So Nuregami, this kanji here for nure means to wetten, to cause to be wet. Now, please, I know there's plenty of jokes we can make here. Let's just be adults about this, okay? But so to be wet, to make wet, and then kami. So the water god, I guess you could say. So the she's a water god, okay? She gives you the power of water. Let's just leave it at that. Oh, okay, that's what this part means right here. Oh, it just means ah. It's just a sound. It's not really a word, but it means something like ah, well then, now then, or so I see kind of a thing. So, oh, it's just an exclamatory thing. Warera ga jibo, okay? Comes from root word ware, which means I. And then we pluralize I with warera, which means we. And then we have warera ga. Ga is a possessive thing, which turns it from we to us. So warera ga, turns it from we to our. Jeez Louise, I'm struggling today. Our, okay? Our. So warera ga jibo. Jibo right here is a Chinese loan word of two kanji. Ji right here meaning compassionate, and bo meaning mother. So our compassionate mother. Warera ga jibo, our compassionate mother. Amaterasu o mikami, okay? Amaterasu is the name of the main character of this game, if you're not aware, which I'm assuming most of you are. But the interesting thing about Amaterasu is Amaterasu actually has a meaning in and of itself. Amaterasu comes from two words, ama, which means heaven, and then terasu, which means to shine, to cause to be bright. So literally, one of the ways that you can translate Amaterasu's name is heaven shining, the thing that shines in the heavens, the thing that makes the heavens shine, the thing that brightens heavens, which is the sun. And then we have O Mikami. Now what's interesting here is that you have these two kanji here, O and Kami, okay? Now you put these two kanji together, and that's one way you can read this is O Kami. However, when you look at this furigana here, these little small characters at the top that tell you how you're supposed to actually read it, there's an extra mi in here. And we will probably, actually, I don't know if we will see this later in Nuregami's little spiel, but mi is just an honorific thing, and technically how you're supposed to say Amaterasu's full name, Amaterasu o Mikami, okay? Now, o means great, and kami means god, as in Nuregami, the god of water, the water god. But, again, we have this extra mi in here. Now, mi is an honorific thing. It's a very, very old honorific thing that denotes a certain level of spiritual power, of majesty again, but again, spiritual power. It's something that you stick on with gods in particular. Like you find it all over in the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki, and the place where there's classic tales of myth are. You have Takemi Kazuchi, Takami Musubi, okay? You have all of these gods with the name Mi in them. Again, it's just an honorific thing, usually divine, kind of like that. So, oh, our compassionate mother, great goddess, heaven shining, because that's the thing in classical Japanese mythology, Amaterasu, the sun goddess, is indeed a goddess and not a god. So, moving on. Okay, now I will forewarn you about this part, is there's actually a lot of non-classical Japanese grammar patterns going on here. There's some modern Japanese grammar patterns that are happening that didn't actually happen in classical Japanese. So the first thing, and again, this is actually kind of indicative of that. So the first thing that we have is o moto, okay? O is an honorific thing, and moto, this is a bit of a complicated topic, okay? If you've seen previous videos, I've explained this before, but I'm going to explain it again. Basically, in short, to get to the point of it, o moto is basically just a fancy second-person pronoun, okay? That's how they're treating it. A fancy second-person pronoun with a lot of honorific implications to it. Now, to explain where this comes from, so this first part, o, okay? O is also another honorific thing because this is Japanese, specifically classical Japanese, so there's a billion different ways that you can express honorifics, or you can express humble speech, you can express polite speech. There's just a bunch of fancy ways of denoting relative social positions in the hierarchy, okay? So O is just a fancy honorific thing. And then we have this kanji moto, okay? Now, moto, the word, can be written with two other kanji, can be written with two other characters, and both of them mean something like the origin, the source, the place of origin, I guess you could say. However, what it's written with here, the kanji it is written with here, is the kanji that means to forgive or to allow. So let me connect these two ideas, origin and source, and to allow, okay? Now, the reason why you do this is because back in the day, when you had aristocrats, you had the aristocracy, you had the nobility, right? Nobility is defined by the fact that they don't do manual labor, right? They are the leaders, they are the ones who get your taxes and they dole it out, and they're supposed to lead stuff, right? They handle all of the bureaucratic stuff. As such, nobility tends not to move around. They stay in one place in their origin, their foundation. This is their base, okay? This is their base, their origin, their foundation. They don't move from there generally. And then if you are somebody who wants to seek out the nobility, who has a petition or something and wants to come see them, to converse with them, to consort with them, to solve whatever problem, you go to where they are, you go to their base, you go to their foundation, and then you are allowed into their presence. So that is the connection between those two things, between base, origin, foundation, and allowing. And because of those two things getting closely connected, that is one way that you can write this here. Is omoto literally means honorific allowance or honorific foundation, honorific base, okay? However, over time, when you started using it like this, when you said that I'm going to go to omoto, when I'm going to go to the honorific foundation of whoever, basically it was just referencing a nobility or a noble person. I was going to go to their residence, I was going to go to their base, okay? And what would happen then is you did that so much, and eventually it just started to be using like a second person pronoun, okay? So with that explained, let's continue. So omoto, you, honorific you, ga. Ga is a subject marker. So it means that omoto, you are the one who is going to be doing the action of the rest of the sentence, which we will see in just a second. That's what this ga does, okay? So you who are the one who are going to be doing a thing. And what is that thing? Okakure tamaishi. Now, this is what I was saying. This is not classical Japanese, okay? Putting an o in front of a verb. This does not occur. I've never seen it in the Tale of Genji. I haven't seen it in Makura no Soshi. I haven't seen it in Konjaku Monogatari Shu. I haven't seen it in like really old Heian period era literary works, okay? However, this is just one way that you can make things more honorific, because Nuregami here, all of these celestial brushstroke gods, they speak to Amaterasu, who is the head goddess, the sun goddess of the Japanese pantheon, right? And I believe they are actually just like offshoots of her. They are like aspects of her. They are vessels that contain the power that was originally a part of her that spread all over the world when she died, and they hid themselves in various areas so that when she came back, they could then be refound and then add themselves to her. So they are parts of her. And so they speak extremely deferentially and extremely honorifically when talking to Amaterasu. And so what they're doing here is they're doing a modern Japanese thing where they are sticking an honorific o in front of the verbs just to make it a little more honorific. So when Amaterasu does something, you stick an o in front of it, and then you conjugate it however you're going to conjugate it, and that makes it honorific. But again, that is not a classical Japanese thing. That is a modern Japanese thing, and I don't know why they're using it here. I'm not going to criticize, because I'm assuming the people who wrote this actually probably know more about classical Japanese than I do. So I'm just saying, I have never encountered this grammar pattern in any of the classical Japanese literary works that I have read. So continuing, honorific, kakure tamaishi, okay? This is a combination of two verbs. Kakure, which means to hide, and tamo, which means for a superior to bestow on an inferior. Now, kakure comes from the root verb kakuru, in modern Japanese kakureru, which again means to hide. However, there's a bit of an extra meaning here, in that in the Kojiki especially, but generally speaking, when you're talking about a very aristocratic, you're talking about a very noble person, when they pass away, it's kind of rude and not, well, I don't know if rude, but it's inelegant to just say that they died, okay? That's just like, ooh, that's so straightforward. That's so right to the point. There's no poetry in saying that. So instead what they say is they hide themselves, okay? They hide themselves. That's a much more euphemistic, it's a prettier, it's a nicer way of saying it. It's got a little more class to it, I guess you could say. So, o kakure. However, we go from kakuru to kakure because this kakure is what's called the renyoke, which in English would be, I would translate it as something like the connection form. Basically, it's what you do when you want to stick other things on the end of this verb, but you don't want to give it any extra special meaning. It's just hide and something something. Hide and whatever comes next. Now, this is actually a soft connection, okay? And what I mean by soft connection is that it takes this verb and it basically makes it so that the distinction between the verb, this verb that we're talking about, this kakure, okay, this kakure, and the thing that comes after, the distinction between them is a little blurry. Basically, it allows it to really combine and become one bigger verb. So kakure tamai, kakure tamo is how you would say it if it was in the ending form. This kakure tamai basically becomes one big verb instead of two neatly compartmentalized separate verbs, okay? And the reason why we're doing this is kakure tamai comes from, again, tamo, which means for a superior to give, to bestow on an inferior. And again, this is just one more instance where Nuregami is using extraordinarily honorific language. This is something that did happen a lot in classical Japanese, where if you are speaking about a superior, you're speaking about an aristocratic person who is above you in the social hierarchy, whenever they do something, they don't just do a thing, they do a thing and bestow that upon you. And this is basically just an honorific thing that you stick on the end of verbs to make it, well, honorific. I don't know how many more times I can say honorific. You're probably getting sick of it. So, o kakure tamai, okay, is honorifically hide yourself, i.e. honorifically passed away. So, o kakure tamai. Now we go from o kakure tamao, tamau technically is what the ending form would be. The ending form, the usual form would be. However, we want to stick it in the connective form. This kakure and tamai are technically the same form. It's the connecting form that allows us to stick other things on the end of it. And the reason why we put it in this connective form is we have tamai shi. Now this shi is actually a little complicated. The closest thing, let's just call it a past tense for now. It's not technically a past tense. It's a recollective, I guess you could say. But it's close enough to a past tense that we can basically just treat it as such. Now, its ending form, this shi, the ending form of shi, is actually ki. Okay, this is a really irregular auxiliary verb. An auxiliary verb just means that it's basically, it functions pretty much the exact same as a verb, but it doesn't have meaning in and of itself. Like, it kind of needs to have things to attach to in order for it to make sense. Again, it's kind of like our English ed, like I walked, I jumped. You can't just say d, right? You go up to somebody, you say d, and they're going to look at you like, are you okay? Do you need help? Are you all right? And you tell them, no, I'm just trying to express past tense. It's like, okay, past tense what? It's the same thing here. It's an auxiliary verb. It functions like a verb because its ending form is technically ki, but what we are doing is we are putting it in what's called the attributive form, the ren taike, okay? And the ren taike of ki is shi. Now, what is the ren taike? The attributive form is the form that you use with both verbs and adjectives when that verb or that adjective is describing a noun that comes after it. So to demonstrate, let's just keep going. So, okakure tamai shi sai. Now, sai, again, this is something that you see in modern Japanese, but I've never seen it used like this in a classical Japanese source. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means that I didn't come around. I haven't ever seen one. Now, sai, in this instance, you can think of it as like instance or event, something like that. So, kakure tamai shi sai, okay? Instance or event. The instance or event that you honorifically hid yourself, okay? The time that you honorifically hid yourself. Which basically just means when you honorifically hid yourself, when you honorifically passed away, okay? And now this is a noun, okay? So basically we use this entire combination of verbs to describe this one noun, which is a when, a time period, the instance of. And now we have this sai is followed by the particle wa. Wa is the topic marker, okay? So the rest of this clause, the rest of this sentence, I guess you could say, is all revolving around this whole thing, this whole omoto ga o kakure tamai shi sai wa, when you honorifically hid yourself. Everything that comes after is in regards to this whole clause, okay? which is really long, and I apologize if I'm breaking this down a little too much for your interest. However, I just want to make sure you guys know how this is working. So in regards to you passing away, Minamo ni aruji o shinobi, okay? Minamo is a verb, well, no, it's not a verb. It's a noun that's a combination of two other nouns. Mina, this mi, comes from mizu, which means water. And namo, mina omote is another way that you can say this. Minamo just means the surface. Omote means like the surface or the face of. So the face of the water, the surface of the water, okay? And then we have ni, which is the prepositional particle, okay? Prepositional particle just meaning that it basically denotes position, direction, something like that. So to, at, in, on, by, all of those things are prepositions, and they're all kind of summarized. They all kind of are all in one in Japanese in this particle, ni. So minamo ni, in the surface of the water, on the surface of the water. I think in is probably the best way to translate it here. So in the surface of the water, aruji o shinobi. So aruji means my lord, like lord or master or something like that. And then o is the object denoting particle. This denotes the object. Now, what's the object? Object of a sentence, if you don't remember your grammar lessons from back in elementary school. An object is the part of the sentence that receives the action. So, for example, the example that I tend to use is a dog eats food. The dog eats food. The subject of the sentence is the dog. It's the thing that does the action. Eats is the action. And then food is the object of the sentence. It is the thing that is having the action done to it, okay? Now, in Japanese, we denote the object of a sentence with this particle, o, okay? So, aruji o, so something is happening to the aruji. And aruji is just another way, just a fancy, another way of referencing amaterasu, okay? Shinobi. This comes from the root verb shinobu, okay? Which means to think fondly of. It means to think highly of or think well of. Generally, it has this strong yearning aspect to it. You see it in poetry all of the time because shinobu can also mean, because the ending form of the verb shinobu, let's not get ahead of myself, the ending form of the verb shinobu is, well, shinobu. But it is also cognate with another verb, shinobu, which means to sneak or to be stealthy. It's where we get the word shinobi, which is another name for ninja, if you're aware of that. However, aruji o shinobi means think fondly of my lord. Think fondly of a lord or master or whatever. Now again, we go from shinobu, which is the ending form of this verb, shinobu, to shinobi, because that is the connective form. So what we are doing is we're saying we're not done with the sentence, okay? Aruji o shinobi. So think fondly of the Lord, think fondly of my Lord, and something else. Although again, I would stress that this is not a super concrete, this is not a super compartmentalized continuation. This is not a super compartmentalized combination. It is a rather soft connection thing. It's not a compartmentalized connection, it's a soft connection. So aruji o shinobi, thinking fondly, so in the surface of the water, think fondly, I think fondly, and again, in English, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense because we would need a subject. However, in Japanese, since we already know who the subject is, it's basically inferred that it is Nuregami, who is thinking fondly of her lord, of her master, which is Amaterasu. Aruji o shinobi, sode o uru o shitaru mo, okay? Sode just means sleeves. It is just a noun, it means sleeves. The big, long, billowy sleeves that the aristocracy would wear. And then we have this o again, so sode is the sleeves are going to be receiving the action of uru oshi, which comes from the root verb uru osu, which means to dampen or to wetten, okay? And this is a very, very poetic phrase. Because in classical Japanese, right? In classical Japanese times, again, the aristocracy had really, really long sleeves, really long, billowy sleeves. And what they would do is when they were moved upon by whatever, when they were struck with grief or some kind of deep emotion and they would weep, what they would do is they would use their sleeves to dry their tears. Thus, if they were crying a lot, their sleeves would get really, really damp and really, really wet. So what she is saying here is she is saying this in a fancy way where she is saying she thinks fondly, she regrets or she yearns for her lord, and she dampens her sleeves, she cries. She is very sad when Amaterasu passed away. She was very, very grief-stricken. However, we have to go from uru su, which is the ending form, which is like the standard regular form of the verb, uru su, to uru shi, which is the renyoke, which again we've seen here, we've seen here, we've seen here. She likes using the renyoke. She likes using the connective form, okay? Uruoshi. So then we can add, and the reason why we do the connective form, so we can add this auxiliary verb taru, which the root form is, or not the root form, the ending form is tari, okay? And it is an auxiliary verb. Again, it doesn't really have meaning by itself. However, what it means, tari, what tari means is to do a thing and then to continue doing it, or to do a thing and then have it be in that state that continues in that state. So in English, you can kind of translate it sometimes as a past tense and sometimes as a something ing, like a play ing, or in this case, a dampening my sleeve, or dampened my sleeve is one way that you could, both two different ways that you can translate this. However, we go from uruoshi tari, which is the ending form, to uruoshi taru, which is the attributive form, which we saw here with this shi back here. The ki goes into shi, turns it into attributive form, which allows us to modify, give attributes to a noun. However, the interesting thing here is this is the attributive form. So technically it's attributing a noun. Now, the astute of you will realize that there is no noun following this. There's a mo, which is just a particle, and there's no actual noun here, which is like, okay, but I thought you said the attributive form modifies nouns. It does. However, this is classical Japanese we're talking about. Modern Japanese too, but classical Japanese especially, assumption is king. Okay, context is king. And because of that, we already basically know what the noun here is supposed to be. It's probably koto or toki, or most likely koto, right? Which is just the thing. So it turns this into the act of. So the act of wetting, of dampening my sleeves. However, because it's so obvious that koto is the actual noun that's supposed to follow, they just don't say it. And because we have it in this attributive form, you know that there's supposed to be a noun that follows after it, but it then becomes so obvious that we don't actually need to say it. So, sodeo uruoshitaru mo. So the act of dampening my sleeves, mo, just means also. It's a particle that means also or even. Even the act of dampening my sleeves, also the act of dampening my sleeves. Continue. Okay. Hi no keshiki yomigaeri taru to araba. Okay. Hi is a noun that means sun, the sun. And then no just means possessive. It means of, or again, possessive. And then keshiki. Keshiki is the appearance of, the state of. Combination of the two kanji for ke, which means like spirit or air, I guess you could say. And shiki, which means color. So the color of the air, or the condition of the air, the condition of the spirit, the condition of the nature of the thing, okay? The color of the nature of thing, the way it appears. That's a little bit of a rough thing to unless you've practiced at it, it might not make sense to you. But if you take the way you're thinking and you kind of break it down into his like simple, most natural, foundational, fundamental way of thinking, the color of the air just means the color of the spirit, the color of the ke. What would we say? Ke is the color of the spirit, the color of the nature of the thing, right? The color of that thing, keshiki, just means the appearance of, the condition of, I guess you could say. So hi no keshiki, the appearance, the sight of, the scenery of the sun, okay? And normally in modern Japanese, usually you would actually have a particle of some kind, a topic marker or subject marker of some kind that would come in between here. Hi no keshiki ga toka, hi no keshiki wa, or something like that. However, because it's classical Japanese, we're not going to do that because why would we need to? So hi no keshiki, the appearance of the sun, the sight of the sun, yomigaeri taru, okay, comes from the root verb yomigaeru, which itself is made up of two parts. Yomi, which is the name of the Japanese underworld, okay? Yomi, and then gaeri, or gaeru, which is the verb to return. So yomigaeri means to return from the underworld. Yomigaeru, return from the underworld, which means to resurrect, to be resurrected. However, we go from yomigaeru, which is the ending form, to yomigaeri, once again, the renyoke, the connective form, because we are doing just like in the last panel, we're putting it in the connective form so we can stick a taru on the end of it. Literally just like the last thing that we just went over. And so taru is the yomigaeri taru, the resurrected, the thing of resurrected, or a thing of resurrecting, I guess you could say. To. This one is actually this to. This to is going to be. I'm going to try to explain it, but I don't know if you'll get it. This is something that you probably, if you're seriously studying Japanese, this will probably take some time to fully understand this. In this instance, I think the best way to translate this to is as. So as the resurrecting of the scenery of the sun, okay, as the resurrecting of the scenery of the sun, we'll probably just go with that, with to. That's what this particle is to. To araba. Now, araba comes from the root verb ari, which simply just means to exist. Okay? It is the classical Japanese to exist, ari. However, what we do is we take ari and we turn it into the mizenke, in Japanese is what it's called, which is the not yet done form, the not yet form. And the reason why we put it in the not yet form is because we are basically saying araba, so not yet existed, not yet existing, because then we put on this ba, okay? And ba means a condition. So when you have the not yet form of a verb, not yet, condition, you combine those two and you get if. So yomigairu taru to araba. If there exists as the resurrecting of the appearance of the sun, of the scenery of the sun, of the condition of the sun. So basically she's saying, if the sun were to come back from the grave, if the sun were to be resurrected, okay? So that's what she's saying, is that she was very, very sad when Amaterasu first perished and vanished and died, and was very sad, and then sat there waiting in the surface of the water, thinking fondly and recollecting and wishing and yearning for her Lord, but also waiting for the day if the sun will come back, when the sun will come back. If the sun comes back, that's what she's thinking. And then kono just means this. It's just, well, it means this. Kono nuregami, right? Now she's in a sense referring to herself in the third person, which in classical Japanese wasn't a sign of arrogance. It was actually quite the opposite. It's if you say I, right? I, ware, nuregami. That's a little bit forceful. That's a little bit direct, saying, I, Nuregami, me, the focus is on me because I'm so important. However, what she's saying is, no, this Nuregami, and I'm not a special person. I'm just one of many. I'm not particularly important. And the reason why she's doing this, again, is because she's speaking to Amaterasu, who is the leading goddess, the head goddess of the pantheon, and basically, again, her jibo, her compassionate mother from whom she springs. So, kono Nuregami, I Nuregami. Okay, Iza. Again, if you've seen previous videos, you know what Iza is. Iza comes from the verb izanao, which means to invite. And basically, it's a thing that you say when you say, let's go, let's do, come on. It's something that you say to try to get people to do something. It's a little bit exclamatory, but it's like, yeah, well then, shall we? Iza, chi ni moyuru, okay? Chi just means the earth, okay? The earth, the ground. And then ni is that prepositional particle, which means in or on. So in the earth, chi ni moyuru. This comes from the root verb moyu, okay, which is where we get the word moe from, which means like to sprout. It's like a sprout or a bud, right? So it's the idea of a plant shooting up. You know, it's not fully grown. It's still growing. I think it is like a bud. It's like a sprout. It's things coming out of the ground and being small and kind of cute, but denoting life, you know? However, we go from the root verb moyu, the ending form being moyu, and then we put it into the dentaike, the attributive form moyu do, okay, which is modifying a noun, and that noun is midori. Midori just means green, okay, so the budding green. So iza, well then, chi ni moyuru midori, the green that sprouts in the earth, chi ni moyuru midori ni, so again, prepositional particle, to the green that's sprouting in the earth, inochi no uruoi o, okay, ataem. So inochi means life, and then no means of, belonging to, right, of. However, when we're translating from Japanese to English, and we have no, right, which translates to of, okay. When we translate it into English, we can take the words and change them into whatever. So life of uruoi, which again, we've seen uruosu, which means to dampen. So uruoi is the dampness, the water, I guess you could say, the water up. However, we have to flip it around. So life of water, let's just say life of dampness, life of water. So we got to flip it around to uruoi. So to water of life. So inochi no uruoi is water of life, okay? And what we're doing here is we're going from the root verb uru o hu, okay, uru o u, which I'm not going to get into the difference right now between uru o su and uru o u, okay? However, we're going uru o u into uru o i. Now, this is that den yoke, which we've seen a million times. However, the den yoke has a second function, in that it is what you do when you want to turn a noun. It is one of the many ways of turning a verb into a noun. Sorry, this is a long explanation. It's kind of long. Apologies. Uru o means to dampen. Uru o I means the dampness or the dampening, which means water. Okay, it's a fancy way of saying water. So inochi no uroi is the waters of life, and then we have the objective particle, the object particle, o, which means the waters of life is going to be receiving the action. What is the action? Ataem. This comes from the root verb atou in modern Japanese, ataeru. And this means to bestow upon, to give to. So atau, however, we've got to turn it into the atae, which is the mizenke, which we saw, where did we see? We saw it back there with the to araba. The mizenke means the not yet done form, the not yet form. And what we're doing is we're putting it in the not yet form, because we're adding this on the end, which comes from mu originally, mu. And when you have the mizenke, when you have the not yet form and the mu form, what you do is this denotes one of two things, okay? It denotes either uncertainty about a thing, like, oh, this might happen, maybe it will happen, perhaps. But it also denotes intention or volition. And the reason why, and I've explained this in previous videos, but I'm going to explain it here once more. The reason why you do this is because in the Japanese way of thinking, in the ancient Japanese way of thinking in particular, beings of power, things that are powerful, things of the natural world, they don't intend to do anything. The sun doesn't intend to come up. It doesn't volitionally of itself come up. It just does. The moon doesn't shine because it intends to shine. It just does. The flowers sprout not because that there's an intense thinking, a volitional thing behind it. They just sprout because they do. And so the Japanese, anciently and modern too, you still see this in some of the grammar patterns, but things that just happen are kind of like above things that have volition and intend to do something. Because when you intend to do something, right, when you strike out on an endeavor and you intend to do this, there's a chance that you will fail. Because things that just do, they don't fail. They just do. Whereas we human beings, we lowly human beings that attempt things, that intentionally try things, there's a chance that we will fail. We might succeed, but we might fail. But as you can see, there's uncertainty about it. We don't know. Maybe it'll be this way, maybe it won't. I don't know. Because I'm a being that has volition and intends to do stuff, it might work, it might not. So, because of that, when you have ataem, it means to bestow, but bestow either with intention or volition, or bestow and I'm not sure, maybe it will work out. However, in this instance, it is very clearly just the volitional form. So, I will bestow, I will give the waters of life to the green that is budding in the earth, the green that is growing in the earth. And I believe, yep, that is the end of the Nuregami section. So that just means nure, which means, again, to dampen, to wetten. There's a bunch of ways of saying it, okay. Okay, so that is the end of that. If you want one final synopsis, recap, again, I did that back at the beginning of the video. It's the first time I'm doing that, just so you can get to the good stuff instantly. You don't have to sit around and wait if you're not interested in hearing my ramblings and my really poor explanations of the grammar of this. You don't have to. But I am going to leave that there. I have no extra cultural commentary or anything. So if you did enjoy this video, if you learned something from it, please give it a like. Please subscribe to the channel because we still, we're maybe halfway through these. They've still got a whole bunch more to go through. And this is all in honor of, hopefully, the release of the sequel that will be coming out. We don't know when exactly, but I'm very much looking forward to that. And I might even stream Okami myself because it is just such a good game. I enjoyed it very much. So if you've been watching all the way up to the end here, thank you very much. Hopefully, we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, everybody.